Interestingly enough, crackers and niggers were named by the same people. The rich planter class of the South, the rich class of the Brits, who saw poor white people and Africans as disposable. And my grandfather looked at me and he said, shit, I like to know my enemies when I walk in a room. And that helped put me on a pathway to understanding why, simply because I didn't like it, was not enough to shut people up. Simply because it made me uncomfortable was not enough to shut people up. And it was always wrong to use government. Before I got to the understanding that freedom of speech is for those even who I don't agree with, I was taught to value freedom of speech by a woman who walked like this. Y'all better be glad she did. Her name was Mrs. Ellison. She taught 9th grade civics. My mother flunked her class. My mother was 16 when she had me, so technically I took Miss Ellison's class twice. I remember my first day in Miss Ellison's class. I was in the back acting dumb, because that's where the cool boys and the cute girls were. And she leaned back, looked over her belly and her prosthetic leg sticking out, and she said, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Michael Render." She said, No. What's your mother's name?" Oh, I said, "My mother's name is Drusella Cluntz." She said, "Go home and ask your mama about me." I said, "I don't live with my mother. I live with my grandmother." She said, "Well, call her if you can find her." So I called my mom that night, and I said, "Mommy." She said, "Yes." I said, "Do you know a lady named Miss Ellison?" She said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I got a class. I got civics." She said, "Listen to me. Shut the fuck up." Now, I didn't come from a shut the fuck up household. I came from a household where we as children could run around there, and as long as it was in proper context, you could say, "I don't give a damn. To hell with you." You could say any number of words because there was a certain freedom in my household, but my mother helped me understand that I was probably going to not have that freedom in Miss Ellison's class. Miss Ellison taught us about the 3 levels of government. Miss Ellison taught us to love the Bill of Rights and Constitution, and she did so in a totalitarian-like way. She helped us to understand that the opposite of this republic was dictatorship, and she made a hell of a despot. Her firm hand made me understand that even in the bowels of slavery, Dred Scott understood that freedom of speech was a necessity. Her firm hand helped me understand that even in the bowels of slavery, Harriet Tubman's freedom of speech, Sojourner Truth's freedom of speech, and Frederick Douglass' freedom of speech was a right that we were not given by a government. We were given by the Creator that put us here as human beings. And the government simply recognized what God had already done. I attended Frederick Douglass High School. And every day you walked into that school, there was a banner that read, "Without struggle, there is no progress." So I need us here to know tonight that there is no grand final winning of freedom of speech. There's no end of the race where we all hold up trophies. It is a constant and protracted struggle to make sure the rights to become a more perfect union are always striven for. To suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer and as well as those of the speaker. I'd always been taught free speech from a very selfish standpoint. I have the right to say whatever the fuck I want to. But what I understood is that when I would ride the train to go to 5 Points to watch people debate religion or politics or something, that I wasn't going to speak. I was going to hear. And what I heard greatly affected me, and it helped me understand that oftentimes the person across the street from me, or the person across the table from me, or the person across from the idea that I think is right has something to offer if I'm willing to hear them. All of us become impacted when we cannot hear. George Wallace grew up in Alabama, terribly segregated, terribly racist, terribly poor, terribly downtrodden. So it's no surprise that on the other side of that, you get a governor that is pro-separation, pro-segregation, and does not understand that the poor and the downtrodden included the black cotton pickers and sharecroppers, and not just the white downtrodden. He thought he was being fair. He thought that separate but equal made sense. He had not heard. And he didn't hear until shot and paralyzed. He didn't hear until forced into invalidity, until forced into seeing that the world is not easy. He didn't hear until after the assassination of King. He didn't hear. But hope remained amongst King's circle, Andy, Joe, Hosea. Well, maybe not Hosea, because he was like, fuck no white folks. Give us our King holiday or we walking out. He didn't hear until he was made to suffer. Just like Paul of the Bible, who once was Saul, who was a Christian killer, did not understand until he heard Christ. And he became something better. So I maintain hope that if we allow ourselves to express to one another our deepest and sometimes our darkest thinkings, that we will eventually hear one another, burn off the fat of prejudice, of racial injustice, of misogyny, of phobias, and we will get to a place where we make a better, a more perfect union. But that never happens if we're not allowed to speak, because if not allowed to speak, we will not be allowed to hear one another. The government has no right to limit your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, your freedom to assemble. The government has no right to limit your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, your freedom to assemble. So I want to talk to the good guys for a second. You know the good guys. I'm a black activist. I'm working on the behalf of women. I'm doing this for immigrants, gays and lesbians alike. We've often allied. We've often helped each other. We've often fought the same masters for basic rights. But be warned that once you become in power, to use government as a bludgeon is as evil as the masters before you. Eugene Debs, he was a guy that Bernie Sanders liked. He was a socialist guy from the early 1900s. He said a quote that I like to read often. It says, "I must be careful, prudent to say what I say, and even more careful and prudent as to how I say it. I may not be able to say all I think, but I am not going to say anything I do not think. And I would rather 1,000 times be a free soul in jail than a sycophant or coward on the streets." A lot of people support free speech until it becomes offensive. As a 12-year-old, I supported free speech until I heard nigger. And my grandfather helped me understand it. It goes across the board. It doesn't end because your feelings are hurt. Miss Ellison helped me understand that although a dictator, she was like Fidel Ellison Castro. You're going to walk out of my class having such an appreciation for this Bill of Rights that you will never in your life again be afraid or be quiet while the rights of others are being taken. George Wallace, the man that was pro-segregationist, ended up shot, ended up crippled, ended up governor of Alabama again, ended up hiring and appointing over 160 blacks, having more blacks in his cabinet and appointments than any other Alabama governor before or after him. He was allowed to be redeemed by Joseph Lowry, by Andy Young, and by others, because finally, he shut the fuck up and heard. And in these times where the allies of justice seem to be winning, it is important that we don't use the media propaganda as a bludgeon to quiet those who may disagree with us. I have a hero. His name is Luther Campbell. Uncle Luke, don't stop, get it, get it. I remember being in high school, seeing him fight Broward County and the United States government because they chose to prosecute him for obscenity. And a woman who's now in our Supreme Court, shouts out to Supreme Court Justice Kagan, I think she was working in Thurgood Marshall's office. She took up Luke's case, and they fought on the behalf of everyone in this room for us to have the very freedom to say what we want. It was very interesting to me that when they got off the plane in Atlanta, and they were filming them, that Brother Marquise held up a Playboy magazine, and no one batted an eye except the news reporter who was trying to get out of the way. And I understood in that moment that Hugh Hefner had not only fought for, but achieved a status in which he was no longer attacked like Luke. Larry Flint had fought for and had achieved a status who's no longer like Luke. And what I come to realize over and over again is that when laws are enacted to use government as a political force to shut up those we disagree with, that oftentimes the first and the worst cases are black people. Right now in this country, the book Rap on Trial explicitly lets you see, the trial of Thugger and others lets you see, that your freedom of speech is at risk. Because the black boys, 500 of them since the 90s that have been brought up, some have been prosecuted, many have went to jail, they just simply wrote bullshit Facebook posts. All I ask is the litmus test be in this country, and the task I give you leaving, to find a case locally to advocate for. Find someone locally, an organization that you may not even agree with, to advocate for. Because the great many of people who don't look like me in this room hold power far greater than I have had or will ever have. And it is up to us as individuals to do our little bit so that no one person has to do a lot and get shot. It is up for us to do a little bit to make sure that even those we disagree with have the opportunity to express freely, that we may engage in dialogue that will push this country into a truly more perfect union. That means we ain't perfect yet. Luther Campbell should be regarded as a patriot for what he did, and not just a naughty uncle who sings tunes that our mothers would blush about because they were actually at Freaknik. Larry Flint, Hugh Hefner, current rappers and artists, period, whether it's visual arts, should be held up in high esteem because oftentimes they come at the artists, the students, and the intellectuals first. And I say to the students in the audience and the intellectuals, don't let your college campuses become so one-sided that you become the masters that you despise. If we're in a country that does not allow thought and opinion, we are China. We are so many scary communist countries that we've saw movies like Red Dawn and Rocky IV about. We have to start seeing a kinship amongst one another. There are thousands of people sitting in jails right now for things they said. It is up to us to leave this room and advocate for them. There are thousands and millions of people that you do not agree with, that we must advocate for the rights of. And if we are not doing that, then we're not doing our job as Americans. If we're not fighting vehemently for the people who disagree with us, then we definitely don't believe in the First Amendment of the United States of America.